anti-Semitic diatribes.
Doron, you can respond.
Anti-Semitic
let me just say something.
Here. And you think you're the most moral
well,
army
I mean,
in the world?
On the
you think the U.S. has no idea?
I think that is
the U.S. has no idea.
Sorry.
Going to check another debate here on Piers Morgan with Dave Smith. IDF International Spokesman. Wow, Doron Spielman. Very curious to see how this goes. I have not watched this yet. I might have some comments throughout. Here we go.
How many times have me and you been told over the last 2 years, by your guest right here in particular, that it is intolerable for Hamas to still be in power, and therefore we have to do whatever we can. And yet they've done all of this, killed tens of thousands of innocent people, destroyed the entire Gaza Strip, and Hamas is still in power. So even by their own logic, you failed on what the goal of this war was. And by the way, Piers, as you know, I've been sitting here, I'm sorry, it's a little frustrating. I've been sitting here for 2 years telling people, you're not going to destroy Hamas this way. And every one of them said, what do you know, comedian? You're not an expert. And yet here we are at the end of the 2 years. Then all the people, I'm not the only one, we're all totally vindicated. Hamas is still there. He didn't even achieve the goal.
Yeah, I mean, Doron Spielman, we were told, look, once the hostages are all released, this is over. That clearly, at the moment, is hanging in the balance. I mean, I think it's obvious it wouldn't take a lot for this to flare up again. But what is indisputable, as Dave says, there's no sign that Hamas has lost all its power. I mean, they're operating with power in Gaza right now. They're still heavily armed. They have said publicly, we are not going to disarm. So, it seems to me that the original aim of releasing the hostages is one thing, but this idea that Israel has defeated Hamas is clearly not true. So where does that leave this ceasefire other than in a very precarious place? If Hamas just say, we are not disarming, what does Israel do?
First of all, Piers, I want to speak to some of the things that Dave just said. When it comes to the fog of war, Dave, I hear that you're saying anytime it's Hamas directly targeting Israeli soldiers, directly targeting civilians, it's the fog of war. You're saying that's the fog of war. But when it comes to Israel targeting Hamas, you still refuse to accept the basic principle. There was no Wannsee conference here. Israel's not committing genocide. There's no ethnic cleansing because they're Gazans. We have one goal, Dave. One simple goal: to destroy Hamas and bring home our hostages. And all of a sudden, it's not the fog of war, Dave. It is your fog. You're unwilling to understand the most basic principle here, that there's probably never been a more moral war fought by an army that does not want to go to war. What's the proof? It's exactly what you're saying. As soon as we got the hostages home, as soon as President Trump put a deal on the table, it's not a perfect deal. What was the very first thing we did? We withdrew exactly to the yellow border. We exactly gave time for Hamas to return the 20 living hostages and the 29 bodies. One second, Dave. One second. I let you speak.
Over dead
one second, Dave. I did let you speak.
Most moral army.
Just give me
go ahead.
One second, if you don't mind. We waited. They just killed 2 of our soldiers. There was no fog of war. These 2 boys were sitting outside a tank, walking around. They were shot by an RPG and killed in cold blood. When I listen to you, it doesn't sound like we're dealing with Hamas. It sounds like we're dealing with a bunch of kindergarten children that are out to play in the playground. This is an organization who crossed the border. And you say that you condemn October 7th, but both you and Pierce, if I may say so, you constantly say you condemn October 7th, but you also condemn every moment from then that we've tried to defend ourselves to go after Hamas.
No, that's not true. Hang on.
Think about the framing. To defend ourselves by offensively going in and destroying the entire Gaza Strip, going in and attacking Lebanon, bombing in Qatar, bombing in Iran, bombing in like 7 different countries in the West Bank, stopping flotillas and mounting them and dropping debris and paint. Like they've just every single step of the way, it's been offensive and just completely belligerent on the part of Israel. So
hang on, Doron. You can't say that about me. I'm sorry. For many, many, many months, after this started, I repeatedly was attacked actually by pro-Palestinians because they felt that I was giving too much license for Israel to exercise its right to defend itself, which I felt was a moral duty to its people, because Hamas has said we're going to keep trying to do this. And they had an absolute right to defend themselves.
Do we not have a moral duty now,
my criticism of the Israeli government and its strategy really became a lot more critical this year, at the start of this year, when I began to see that it was not achieving its goals. It wasn't getting Hamas destroyed. It wasn't actually getting the hostages released. It was leading to what I think are going to end up being categorized as war crimes, like the 3-month blockade. It was leveling Gaza to complete obliteration. And I felt this was A, completely disproportionate, but B, and probably even more significantly, it wasn't achieving the initial war goals. And coupled with that, we have people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir openly talking about their desire for ethnic cleansing.
Smotrich and Ben-Gvir,
I know.
That's a red herring.
Hang on. All the Israeli guests,
runs the government.
It's a red herring. They're like the two major parts of the Israeli war cabinet. What are you talking about?
Israeli guests I have on always say you should ignore two senior members
you
of
don't
the
have to
Israeli
ignore them. It's a
government.
democracy.
And I'm sorry.
We made the deal.
I'm sorry. It's a bit like
They're in
people
the
saying.
government.
It's a bit
People
like
voted
people
for
saying in Britain with the British government, just ignore what the Chancellor says. Ignore what the Foreign Secretary
they're not
says.
the Chancellor. They have no power.
These people are senior members of the government. They have an influence over Netanyahu. No
Because it's a
question.
democracy. But if they have an influence, Piers, then how is it? You're saying both things and they're opposites. If they have influence, we just said that Prime Minister Netanyahu agreed to an imperfect deal presented by President Trump, even though Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and many people in Israel, including myself, including you, as we opened up, I think even including Dave, saying, what does it mean we're not winning? It means that this is not a great deal. We don't see Hamas completely obliterated. I agree with you. I agree with Dave. Hamas is still in Gaza. How did that happen? Because Prime Minister Netanyahu is betting on President Trump. So am I. President Trump just announced that he sees Arab allies that also say they're going to go into Gaza and teach Hamas a lesson if they don't straighten out. What are we to do but rely on the word of the most powerful man in the entire world? And I'm hoping that that man is going to find a way to dismantle and destroy Hamas. It is point number 1 and point number 9 in the deal that we signed. And if he goes and does it, we'll have achieved 2 goals. We got our hostages home. Many of them are dead because Hamas are cruel bastards. Most of them are alive. And if we can continue the goal of wiping Hamas out of Gaza, we can rebuild Gaza. But it's these conversations when, oh, you're killing, you can't kill, you can't fight back. If we listened to these, Pierce, I would have raised the white flag. We would have raised the white flag. 2 years ago, Hamas would be fully in charge of Gaza and all of our hostages would still be there. This has been incredibly successful. Well, no, it's not perfect. The fact that it's not perfect does not mean that we have not achieved an enormous amount and that we cannot win.
No, you've killed hundreds, potentially hundreds of thousands of civilians, at least 100,000, millions displaced. You've made Israel a pariah state. Everybody hates you. You guys are completely unhinged lunatics that are belligerent and committing war crime after war crime with a radicalized population that is continuing to perpetuate disaster and a war that continues to make the situation worse. You are worse off, much worse off. Everyone is much worse off than they were 2 years ago since this absolute disaster of a campaign. And to think that Donald Trump, God help everybody, God help us all if Trump is the solution to trying to, you know how to dismantle Hamas. You as Israelis and as the United States, you back off. You stop occupying Gaza. You stop occupying the West Bank. You stop the settlements. You allow for a 2-state solution. You grant Palestinians their statehood, and you want to continue monitoring them. Of course, just like we monitor our own civilians here in the United States. You want to monitor the West Bank. You want to monitor Gaza. Whatever. Do what you got to do. But you have to stop the atrocities, the belligerence, the human rights violations, and you have to move towards a state of equilibrium because we are far, far from that at this point. That is just the reality of the situation.
Victory, it sounds like an ancient word, is in our grasp. It depends on President Trump if he's willing to go the extra mile.
All right, Dave Smith, I want to read what Trump posted on Truth Social. Numerous of our now great allies in the Middle East and areas surrounding the Middle East have explicitly and strongly, with great enthusiasm, informed me that they would welcome the opportunity at my request to go into Gaza with a heavy force and straighten out Hamas if Hamas continues to act badly in violation of their agreement with us. The love and spirit of the Middle East has not been seen like this in 1,000 years. It's a beautiful thing to behold. I told these countries and Israel, not yet. There is still hope that Hamas will do what is right. If they do not, an end to Hamas will be fast, furious, and brutal. I would like to thank all of those countries that called to help. Also, I'd like to thank the great and powerful country of Indonesia and its wonderful leader for all the help they have shown and given to the Middle East, and to USA, to everyone. Thank you for your attention in this matter, President Trump.
Great. So that means hanging over their heads and our heads and the world's heads is the prospect of sending U.S. troops, Americans, young men and women, into Gaza, into that absolute hellhole, to go and try to root out Hamas in street by street warfare like fucking Fallujah 2.0. Of course, another absolute disaster. American men and women would die. Gazan civilians, Palestinians would continue to die. And would you end up rooting out the rest of Hamas? No, because if Israel could do that, they would have done that already with the numerous brigades of ground troops that they have there already. So just, I mean, what the fuck?
So he's coming under a lot of pressure, clearly, to potentially commit American forces to engage, it seems from this post, with Israel to finish the job with Hamas. I mean, that would be, to me, a massive and potentially extremely problematic escalation if that was to happen.
I think that it happens quite often in American history where their presidents kind of go all in on some type of a peace deal, not a peace deal in this case, but a ceasefire. Obviously, this is it's very important to Donald Trump's political legacy and political capital that this works. And what ends up happening is, once there's signs that it's not working, it's much easier to publicly blame the Palestinians than it is to publicly blame the Israelis. There's just much less of a political price tag. Gaza does not have a lobby and a bunch of billionaires and a bunch of influence in our country, and Israel does. And I'm sorry, but anyone can go listen to them for themselves to the 60 Minutes interview with Jared Kushner and with Witkoff. Again, these are two representatives of the most pro-Israel government in the history of the United States of America, and they are both saying Israel was out of control. Israel had to be brought to the table. Israel was doing things that weren't in their long-term interests, says Jared Kushner.
Yeah.
And they both also said a very interesting detail, that all of the intelligence that they were getting was saying that Hamas didn't want to do a deal, but as soon as they approached them with this deal, Hamas was very enthusiastic about getting it done. And by the way, that is very consistent with reporting that's been done by Jeremy Scahill and Ryan Grimm. You know, like some of these journalists who actually do talk with the leadership of Hamas. Now, Piers, to the point that was made before, I'm sorry, you've been interviewing me on this show for 2 years now or something like that. You've had me on a bunch of times. I mean, just tell me, to any normal person, have I ever seemed like I'm sympathetic to Hamas?
No.
Or that I'm saying that they don't have the responsibility they have? I've chastised other critics of Israel on this show before, because I think it's goofy when people do that.
And by the way, Dave,
Hamas,
I would say it's perfectly reasonable and intellectually honest to say Hamas are despicable, and what they did on October 7th was a horrendous terror attack, which obviously demanded a response, but that also Israel's response became increasingly disproportionate. I don't think these two things are incompatible.
Of course they're not. And of course, also, it's worth looking at the fact, was Hamas ready to do this deal earlier and Israel was actually the impediment to it? Look, I'm not making excuses for Hamas. I'm not pretending they're children. I'm not denying them agency. In fact, as I've been saying for years, one of the things that I'm most furious at Netanyahu for was his strategy of propping up Hamas for years, specifically with the goal of thwarting a Palestinian state. And so, you know, to sit here and then turn around and talk about how evil Hamas is and use them as the justification for why you are somehow allowed to just destroy a captive people that don't have a military of their own to defend themselves. It's just, look, I'll just say this. There was one poll recently that had, they said right before October 7th, in America, do you sympathize with Israel or Palestine, was plus 48 for Israel. And then the latest poll, it was +1 for the Palestinians. You would be hard pressed to find a 50-point collapse in any issue. Like, just imagine, Piers, if we woke up tomorrow and 90% of America was pro-life. We'd be like, what happened here? I mean, and the reason why this shift is happening is very simply because what Israel's doing to the Palestinians is so indefensible. The relationship between Israel and the United States of America is too bizarre, and it does not make sense in America's interest. And number three, this type of propaganda just doesn't work on people. You can't sit here and say you're the most moral army in the world as a response to my point that you just denied food to an entire civilian population because you claim Hamas is slow rolling dead remains. I'm not saying dead remains don't matter, but we're talking about real, alive babies, children, women who just went through this nightmare for 2 years, and you are denying collectively denying the civilian population aid over a Hamas, something that maybe Hamas did, and you think you're the most moral army in the world?
Look, on this, Doron, let me ask you a question first. Doron, you can respond. Doron, you can respond. Doron, you can respond.
Oh, anti-Semitic. There it is.
Anti-Semitic.
Let me just say something.
Here.
Let me just say something. Doron, I would say this. What was noticeable in the Jared Kushner interview you're talking about with Witkoff as well, that they made it clear that
No, that was just to say that was one of Dave Smith's most brilliant rants on this whole issue. And to call the Israel-U.S. relationship bizarre, I don't think you can really come up with a more incisive, correct way to describe that. It is bizarre, guys. It's just absolutely strange. It's uncanny. The depths to which this relationship controls billions of dollars and hundreds of votes in the U.S. Congress is absolutely, completely bizarre. It's beyond comprehension.
Tipping point for American intervention to rein in Israel was the completely senseless attack on Doha, on the Hamas negotiators who were considering the latest plan to bring this to an end, which ended up killing no Hamas negotiators, which in itself I think would have been an appalling thing to do at that time when people were trying to bring peace, but actually ended up killing a bunch of people unconnected, including one of the Qatari security service people. And that was the tipping point because Donald Trump, I was there in Qatar earlier this year at the state dinner by the emir for Trump. They're very close. They go back a long way. America has its biggest army and military base in the Middle East is at Qatar. And to just go and brazenly attack Doha in the way that it did, I thought was an absolutely crazy thing for Israel to do. It showed that they were acting with complete impunity, didn't care about their number one ally, America, and the damage this might cause to the relationship with one of its biggest allies in the Middle East. And at that point, Trump went, enough. We're not doing it. I mean, do you accept that that was a catastrophically stupid thing to do by Israel?
First of all, I want to address what Dave said about the poor Palestinians, and they'll be the scapegoat because they don't have a lobby. And Jews have a lobby in the United States. Yes, Jews have a lobby in the United States. I have news for you. The Hamas regime and the Palestinians have a lobby. Do you know what it's called, Dave? It's called Qatar. Qatar, which has infected every single university in the United States, just signed a $1.2 trillion deal, which is a country that is funding more terror on behalf of Iran than any other thing. Who is their other patron? Iran. Why do you think Hamas came to the table? Well, let's think about.
Since when does Qatar have fucking influence in U.S. fucking universities? And has anyone ever heard of this before?
What happened over the past year?
Qatar.
Iran, their major patron, was brought to its knees by who? By Israel. The U.S. flew in and put the cherry on the very top of the sundae. We fought Iran for 11.5 days and completely eliminated the mask of Iran. Hezbollah, their other northern enemy, completely annihilated. I think they probably, if we don't move forward, we'll be able to resuscitate, but they're out of the picture. Syria no longer exists, and Hamas has been eliminated.
Syria no longer exists. Who would have thought?
Levels of their leadership has been eliminated. 3 more months of fighting would take them out of the picture. The very thing that you're saying, their very support network is gone. And if you ask me, Piers, the strike on Qatar, I'm not a member of the government. I'm not a member of the security cabinet. I think it's not a coincidence that within 3 weeks of Israel striking Qatar, there's a peace deal that's bringing 20 hostages home. Now, you might think that the U.S. had no idea.
I think that's completely.
You think the U.S. had no idea.
I think that is completely.
The U.S. had no idea.
Sorry, Doron, I've got to be honest. I think
that is nonsense.
I think that's a ridiculous thing to say.
Why should we apologize for striking
this is why you're losing.
Regime that is. Wait, I'm going to understand something. Piers, you said you were at the state dinner.
This is exactly why.
A regime. I'm sorry, Dave. Yeah. This is a regime that houses the heads of Hamas. This is a regime that is intimately connected, Dave, to 9/11.
Yes.
Do you think that's a conspiracy theory? Do you think they were connected to 9/11?
Do you think, is it a conspiracy theory that Benjamin Netanyahu sent the head of Mossad there to, quote, beg them to keep the funds going into Hamas? Is that a conspiracy
it is
theory?
true. It's absolutely true.
Okay.
And guess
Okay.
what?
There you go.
Guess
Okay.
what? Guess what, Dave?
Point match,
I think it was
Piers.
a horror.
What are we
Exactly.
doing
I
here?
agree with your point. Dave, I agree with your point. The fact that we allowed Qatar to fund Hamas all these years under whose pressure? U.S. pressure, Israel not wanting to get the job done was a catastrophe and led to October 7th. By enabling that regime to get that funding,
how can you say that and not
hold on, Dave.
Benjamin
Led to
Netanyahu
October
step down
7th.
immediately?
However,
Like, what?
once October 7th
Okay.
happened and Israel woke up to the idea that you cannot contain an enemy like Hamas. You cannot just beat Hamas. You have to risk your lives. You have to go after a regime that spent 20 years, Dave. I was in Gaza. Have you been to Gaza? Did you
You've
go to
never
Gaza
been
between
there.
2005 and 2000?
But you've never been there.
Does anyone on the internet
Wait.
not know the answer to this question, Pierce?
So you have not been to Gaza. So guess what, Dave? If you would have gone to Gaza like I did, and like many other reporters, then you saw it on the news, it took 18 years for them to build 500 miles of terror tunnels under buildings and our homes, which I've been in, which have seen it with my own eyes. And guess what? We didn't want to go in. Do you know why? Because we knew once we went in, Piers Morgan, Dave Smith, Doron Spielman would be debating about genocide, which never happened because Hamas put their people there. You are literally scripting, Dave.
so you're admitting
exactly
think about
what
how
Hamas
much
planned. We didn't want to do it. We
Okay,
allowed
yeah,
Hamas
right.
to
I
build
actually think,
and
Doron,
metastasize
I
so
actually
it would
think,
happen.
Doron, I actually think when all this is over, and hopefully we're at the beginning of the end, when it is all over, and we look back on how the Mossad, in particular, the world's supposedly most brilliant intelligence agency, did not know that 500 miles of tunnels were being built by Hamas, or question why that might be, and had no apparent knowledge of any attack of the scale that happened on October the 7th, and no one can explain why it took so long on that day for Israel to properly defend itself. All of these things seem pretty inexplicable for
I agree with you.
the most superior armed force in the Middle
No
East.
question.
And
But now that we've recovered,
supposedly the most sophisticated.
That was October 7th, which you condemned.
My point is, there's a lot of accountability to come to answer some of these questions.
No question. But you
and
know
there's
what,
no
Piers?
doubt. There's no
Now
doubt. By
that
the
we
way,
wake
you
up
talk
from an
about. You
attack-
talk about. Hang on. You talk about Qatar, but let's talk about also. I'm going to leave it with this because we have to move on. But if you look at what Netanyahu did in helping funnel billions of dollars to Hamas through Qatar, then he was trying to do divide and rule with the Palestinian Authority. It suited Benjamin Netanyahu to have the Palestinians split between these two groups. He actively encouraged it. But unfortunately, he created a monster that he didn't realize, or maybe he did, we don't know. He didn't realize the scale of the monster he created, or that it would come and do what it did on October the 7th. And there will be serious questions for Netanyahu when this is over, which may explain why he has perpetuated this war as long as he has, because he's also facing a criminal
Exactly
court
correct.
case over
I
corruption.
disagree, Piers.
So there are.
And I'd like to respond
I
to
don't
this.
think to agree.
I'd like-
Impossible to disagree. But Netanyahu has been perpetuating this and dragging it out and cutting down and blocking all of the peace processes because it's good for one thing and one thing only. It is keeping himself in power, preventing himself from getting investigated for war crimes or getting arrested or whatever, what have you, because his life after being prime minister is not going to be good. I hope.
I've got to leave it there. I've got to leave it there. Dave,
I would
I'm
like
sorry.
1 minute, half a minute to respond.
We've run out of time. But no, that's just my overview. Maybe I'm
Well,
wrong.
it's not your overview. That's your opinion.
Yeah, it's my
I will
opinion.
just say that I will just, my opinion, in 20 seconds with your permission, that
boy.
Prime Minister Netanyahu has now carried out a war that has destroyed enemies throughout the Middle East and has put Hamas to the brink.
And has destroyed Israel's reputation in the world, made them less safe, not more safe. And that is just the reality of the situation. Wow. That was an absolute disaster, crash and burn. You see these guys, these propagandists. That was an IDF spokesman, whatever that means, potentially one of the worst jobs you can have in the world, morally speaking, at this point in time. Dave Smith just crushes and destroys and eviscerates that fellow. I'm curious to know what you guys thought about that in the comments. Drop a like, subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one, in the next debate.